Hi, my name's Greg Szożyński. I'm a rehab officer for visually impaired individuals. Question to both of you, actually, one to Gemma and one to Seb. Firstly, you mentioned professionals earlier, about speaking to professionals if people have got a worry. Do you work with rehab officers, or is it just OTs? Because obviously you mentioned OTs, but obviously as rehab officers we're working sort of on the front line with people with sight loss.
Yeah, I think traditionally we haven't worked that much with rehab officers. You tend to find that people with dementia stay in the dementia field and people with sight loss stay in the sight loss field. But something that's definitely come out about the work that we've been doing is trying to be more inclusive with people that you could talk to if you have problems. And at Alzheimer's Society we have over 2,000 members of staff, so it's about getting information out to them about who they could talk to if they were experiencing those kinds of difficulties, and that there's other people around that might be able to help out. So,
I think personally what I'd probably say is the fact that working with people with visual impairments day in, day out, we will come across a lot of people with sight loss, with dementia, with PCA. Personally, I've worked with a few. And so I think rehab officers are probably going to be a very important source of information for you.
Absolutely. And
Definitely.
just to say that I know Keir Young has taken a particular interest in working with different professionals who are working with people with any kind of dementia-related visual impairment, and also Anne McIntyre will be talking later about the work they've done interviewing different professional groups. But it's a really critical group. You're absolutely right.
Sorry, just while we're on it. Obviously, within Vision UK, we've very much supported the growth and the work of the professional organisation for rehabilitation workers, and obviously the information that we produce within rehabilitation goes to all the people within that. So people like Sam and Labette obviously have been crucially involved in stuff. We've done responses to NICE on dementia and stuff, which again rehab workers have been involved in. So just to let you know, we're certainly not missing you out, and obviously invited here today. So yeah.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Oh.
I've just got one more for Seb, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
And then down here.
You were doing the dot test earlier. You were explaining how the dot test works. And obviously the dot disappearing or not being there or moving around. How much research is there with regards to people who have got other eye conditions, like macular degeneration or glaucoma or cataract, on top of possibly having PCA as well?
None.
Right.
I'm not aware of any. I mean, Keir may correct me. I can't think of any papers I've seen where it's people with PCA plus a visual problem.
So obviously with normal visual problems, you can have that same sort of diagnosis.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
it's an area for further work.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a
Question
lady
down
on the side. Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
Okay. Fantastic presentation, and so key to people is something you said about listening is key. And I wondered whether there was any plan to do any deeper work in terms of communicating with people who have dementia, in terms of speech connected to their eyesight or their brain sight.
Sorry, when you say speech connected to their eyesight, you mean what words people use to describe their visual
yes,
challenges?
and I'm working with Warwick University at the moment on an interesting piece of research around the speed with which people speak, the voice, the inflection, the tone, the language, and we're tracking that over a 2-year period with images that they're looking at and words that they're reading from a screen. And so that's something that's very interesting to me, and given what you've been saying about listening and how people communicate with people who've got brain sight issues, I'm interested in what work you might be doing around that.
Yeah, so we've certainly looked at language abilities in people living with PCA. So there are some dementias which target language first. In PCA, it's more a secondary or third or sort of tertiary consequence. But definitely speech rate does decline in people with PCA, and particularly and that might be in different situations, but certainly if you're trying to describe something or respond to something visual around you, that may be particularly difficult and challenging for people. And in terms of how you can spread this learning to other people, I think the comments of people with PCA often stimulate people who haven't previously spoken about their visual difficulties to do so. So I once spoke at one of Mike Bowen's events about the PROVIDE study, and someone in the audience, after I'd spoken about PCA, someone living with memory-led Alzheimer's disease, said it reminded her that what she had found most frustrating about her time of diagnosis wasn't being diagnosed with dementia. She said, that wasn't that much of a shock. I went to my doctor with a memory problem and he told me I had dementia. I was like, yeah. What really bothered her was that people denied her visual experiences. She was saying, I'm having difficulty seeing things are disappearing or being hard to judge. And someone tested her eyes and said, no, you're not. Your eyes are fine. Because there just was a total disconnect between vision perceived to be an eye thing and dementia perceived to be a brain thing, and unawareness about that connection. So I think talking about these sorts of issues will elicit people to describe perhaps subtle or varied ways in which vision is an issue for them.
We have a lady back over here.
Hello, my name is Rita Cumberland. I'm a carer of a lady who was diagnosed, first of all, with Alzheimer's in 2010, and then subsequently was referred to UCL under Professor Fox. And we've been coming to these groups for some time. Through observation, I agree with everything that you've said about the difficulties, but I have noticed that of recent times there has been confusion between knowing left from right. And in fact, it's almost as though the brain has gone into reverse. It even extends to conversation of disagreeing with almost everything that one says. I don't know whether that has been shown in any other of your research.
I think I think it builds on what I was saying about it's not just vision, it's many things related to but beyond vision. So, for example, these parietal lobes that we mentioned, which are particularly damaged, are very interested in order, and that's why spelling and writing and calculation and things become difficult. And certainly there are some people who I've worked with PCA and other forms of dementia in whom not just left-right get confused, but yes-no, the positive and negative can become confused. Because these are all, even though we totally take them for granted, do I agree with something or not, we think of them as being so kind of simple because we don't regularly struggle with them. But actually, as these progressive conditions affect different parts of the brain, then even those sort of fundamental concepts, I think, can become confused. Not necessarily all the time, but sometimes. So, yeah, I think that could well be part of it.
We have a question.
Okay. My name's Bowen, and basically I'm deafblind, and I've got neurological problems. So, from what, basically they haven't actually diagnosed me as yet. I haven't been diagnosed, but they know that I'm deafblind and I've got neurological problems. Basically, my eye stuff's completely fine, but I only got central vision. Do you, by any chance, would it be the same as what you were talking about?
I think with all neurological difficulties, be it that affect a particular part of the brain, so if your back of your brain is affected by dementia or by stroke or by brain tumour, then you can see some similarities because fundamentally the brain's a very organised organ, and if you damage a part of it, irrespective of why that damage happened, you can see some common difficulties. But there should be, a good clinician should be able to discriminate between the nature of your problems and identify what's difficult and what's not, but also ascertain why that's happening. So, for example, a difference for lots of people with PCA. PCA affects both sides of the brain, sometimes a little bit more one than the other, but always both sides of the brain, whereas strokes, for example, often only affect one side of the brain. So there's certain tests that someone with a stroke visual problem could do that someone with PCA might find more difficult. So there should be ways of tangling it out, but we could perhaps talk more after.
Let's take one more question, and then there will be time during the breaks and lunch that you can ask more questions. So we have one more.
Hi, sorry. I work with a lot with people with dementia, and I suppose one of the issues I find... sorry. Oh, okay, all right. Sorry, I work with a lot of people with dementia, and I suppose one of the issues I have is about the misuse of the word dementia. And somehow there seems to be a bias to delineating a spectrum within memory-led Alzheimer's disease, but all the other forms of neurocognitive disorders everyone is just lumped as having a dementia. So you mentioned earlier on about the fact that someone who has PCA in the very early stages, beyond that circumscribed visual, spatial, and other facets which are lost, are functioning quite well. That is not a dementia. Similarly, you have people with Lewy body disease. As soon as you make that diagnosis, you have to label them as having dementia. All they're having are visual hallucinations, but beyond that, they're functioning fine. And the definition of dementia requires you to show a loss of functionality. So I can't understand, I don't know if you've got any strong feelings in terms of within the ICD classification, the new one which will be coming out, ICD-11, they have split Alzheimer's disease to say preclinical Alzheimer's disease, memory-led, mild neurocognitive disorder secondary to Alzheimer's disease, and so on. Surely there should be the similar kind of delineation for people with the rarer forms of these neurodegenerative disorders, so that if someone's got this in the early stages, you're basically saying it's mild neurocognitive disorder secondary to PCA, rather than lumping everyone all in one basket, but they've all got dementia, which is wrong, because that person is still reasonably independent, and therefore you're misdiagnosing them.
I think we all agree it's frustrating. So recently I heard Martin Rosser, who's the National Director of Research for Dementia, say he hated the term dementia, but it is politically useful at the moment. So let's not kid ourselves. We all agree that the term dementia is in many ways outdated, too general and not helpful. But if you mean dementia as in a progressive loss of higher cortical functions, which is how causing functionality, then people with PCA do have dementia, if you use that definition. They do absolutely, as I said, do not conform to many of the older and outdated definitions of dementia. And increasingly, in different fields, and of course there are lots of people trying to define all sorts of things in different schema, people are recognising these rare forms of dementia. So recently, in the past few years, the Alzheimer field, rather than just saying this is the definition of Alzheimer's disease, have now included, and this is the atypical Alzheimer's disease, which might be visual, which might hit language first, which might challenge behaviour first. And so slowly these things are being articulated and being made more specific. So I sort of agree and disagree.